Apparently, all British black men don't date British black women. That's what online will have you thinking, right? Hey Huns, welcome to my channel. My name is dami.zain, the professional yapper. By the title of this video, you know exactly what I'm here to talk about. And I'm sorry if you are sick and tired of this discussion, but I've spoken about this on TikTok and I thought the best way to launch my YouTube channel is to bring the discussion here, mainly to talk about whether or not British black men date British black women. If you watch this video to the end, can you please like it? Can you please subscribe if you're not subscribed already? And if you hear any background noise, just know that I live in East London and it's very noisy over here. So I'm sorry for that. Now, I'm going to caveat this whole video by saying that there is absolutely no way I can sit here and tell you exactly what every single black British man and every single black British woman does. I can only share my experience. I can only share my opinion and obviously open the comments and the floor up to anybody else that wants to add to what I'm saying, but keep it respectful. Online, for the last 2 weeks, we've been talking about this podcast that I'm not going to name and a mistake that they made when they went on an American podcast and laughed at jokes about black women. The American girls, I love you guys because you lot jumped on that real quick and said, what we're not going to do is disrespect us in this country. And you know what happened off the back of that? Cancellation. Cancellation doesn't work. That's a conversation for another day, but you know. And since then, it's been 2 weeks. 2 weeks of black women, black men, non-black people talking about this podcast. This podcast made it to BBC News. If you're not from the UK, that's a big deal. Because I've never seen a podcast end up on BBC News because people want to cancel the podcast. I've never seen that before. Now, I'm not going to lie, on my TikTok, I threw in a few videos. I spoke about an apology video that this podcast did. I spoke about the American podcast reaction to that apology. And I also spoke about another viral clip that went round. If you want to get a bit more context, you could always go onto my TikTok. But unless you've been living under a rock for the last 2 weeks, you probably know who I'm discussing without saying their name. I was on TikTok the other day and I came across a video from London Hughes. If you don't know who she is a British comedian who has moved to, I believe it's LA, and she's been there for like 4 years now. She has a following on TikTok. She's an amazing, amazing comedian. Absolutely love the gal. Go follow her if you're interested. But she gave her perspective on this whole podcast shindig, but she also gave a bit more context from her perspective as to why that podcast reacted that way to the jokes about black women.
Okay, so in Britain, it's hard to explain. Basically, there's a thing called internalized racism, and it's very prevalent with black British men. You'll go around in the UK as a gorgeous, dark-skinned black woman like myself, and 9 times out of 10, the black men there, they don't want to date you. Like, it's like, I know it happens in America as well, but it happens so much in the UK to the point where, like, I could just tell by looking at Farhad and James that they don't date black women. I know they've said they date everybody, but that's just code for, I like women, I like racially ambiguous women. It's obvious. And mixed race men like James, 9 times out of 10, I know in America they have the 1 drop rule, whereas if you got a bit of black in you, you're black. We don't have that in Britain. So mixed race is its own genre. And a lot of mixed race men, they are half black and half white. And so sometimes you'll meet them 9 times out of 10, culturally, they lean more into the white side than the black. And also to get far in the industry, especially the podcast industry in Britain, again, that proximity to whiteness is there. Everyone's white, and like your boss is white, your agent's white, the producer of the podcast is white. He's not around. Neither of them men are around black women that like that. Maybe family members. Outside of that, in their workspace, they have probably said things that disparage black women all the time, and it's gone unchecked. Which is why that Andrew Schultz said that. They didn't remove the comment from the podcast because literally I don't think they thought there was anything wrong with saying that, because they're so used to disrespecting black women. Because like I said, the proximity to whiteness in the UK is that, like, white people disrespect black women, black men disrespect black women. Like, we're just so used to taking L's over there that some people don't even realize they're L's, myself included. I've had things happen to me, and it's not until I've told my American friends, and they've been like, they said that? They did what? And I'm like, oh, yeah, I guess that was bad. But like, you're just so used to the disrespect. So, no, I don't think they apologized because they got caught. They apologized because it was the right thing to do. But no, as you can see, they've pulled up their old podcasts and they've said a lot of crazy things about Black women in the past. And again, they probably didn't think that that was a big deal because, like I said, Black women stay taking L's in the UK. It's very sad.
So there's parts of this video that I agree with. I do agree that when you are working in the industry, you're more surrounded by whiteness. And also because in the UK, we make up 4% of the population. If you want to make it in the UK, you need to be marketable to more than just the Black community. So with that in mind, that's probably why a lot of the time creators try to align themselves with whiteness a bit more. But this narrative that British Black women take BS from British Black men in comparison to American women, I'm not sure I can agree with that. I think it depends on where you were raised, where you grew up, what your community is like. You cannot go to a South London girl and talk to her anyhow, whether you are black, white, blue or yellow. She's gonna check you. She's going to put you in your place. Same thing if you're from East London. Same thing if you're from North London. Same thing if you're from certain parts of West London. We're going to put you in your place. We're not having it. But the UK isn't made up of London alone. And not all Black people are monolith. You get some people that are more timid, more quiet, some people that are more mouthy. That's me. Some people that don't like confrontation, some people that do like confrontation. So to make that assessment that all British Black women take BS from all British Black men is a reach. Our approach to this particular podcast, though, was more of, oh, we already knew that them lot were problematic and we don't follow them. There were still some Black women that do follow and do engage with their content, probably because they only ever saw their TikTok videos where it was all light banter, but never actually watched their YouTube or listened to their podcast or subscribed to their Patreon. The American girls wanted to know, okay, if the Black British men are not dating you lot, then who are you dating? This is what she had to say.
Okay, quickly before I go out, the girlies want to know if Black British women are not dating Black British men. Who are they dating? The answer is, we're dating white guys. Both my ex-boyfriends in the UK were white. I'll tell you the type of white, like liberal white men. Like if you watch Love is Blind UK, Benaya. I was dating Benayas, and dating Benayas was great. They treat you very well compared to my other option, which was not dating at all because the Black men in my circles weren't checking for me. They were very much exclusively only dating white women, and they let me know. And to the Black men that I did date, some of them had internalized racism. So there was things about my Blackness they didn't like. So for example, I'm not seen as attractive in the UK. Yeah, I'm not, I mean, I'm all right, but I led with my personality more because I just didn't think I had the looks. And it was Black men telling me that I didn't have the looks. Like some of the worst names I've ever been called ever in my life have been from Black British men. So I remember I dated a Black guy and he wouldn't like it if I took off my wigs at night to sleep. He wanted me to sleep with my wig on because he didn't like my 4C hair. And I would date like white guys, like liberal white guys that, at times would, when I'm too tired, would take my wig off for me and put it on a wig stand and brush it out. So, yeah, I think that Black British women have decided to just go where we're wanted and where we're adored. And if that's white men, it's white men. And love is love and be happy. But yeah, I noticed, and we kind of all noticed that like a lot of Black men in the UK have a preference and it's not us.
Now, respect to London, and I've spoke about this on my TikTok, respect to her for sharing her experience. But when she said we, I was like,
now why am I in it?
Why am I in this? Because that's not my experience. And I'm getting a bit annoyed about this narrative because it comes across as though we're all suffering over here. I mean, don't get me wrong, the dating scene is the ghetto. But I don't think that's because British Black men are not dating British Black women. I think that's just because of people's mindsets around dating nowadays. It's important for me to explain that I'm from London and I've lived in London for the majority of my life. I spent about 7 years in a predominantly white area towards the end of my teenage years. But when it was time to get my degree, I made sure that I went to a university that was predominantly black because, listen, I'm very, very African. I might have been born in the UK, but I'm very, very African. And so, like, for me personally, I've only ever had black guys showing interest in me. I cannot recall a time in my life where non-black men were checking for me. It's only ever been black men. I've only ever dated black men. And I'm not saying it to brag. I'm saying it because that's my lived experience. And it's also the lived experience of all of the black women in my life, from friends to family to colleagues. That is our lived experience. And I don't want to minimize or reject other black women's experiences because I'm very aware that for some women, they haven't dated black men or they've liked black men, but those black men didn't like them back. And so now they feel disenfranchised or they've had really bad dating experiences with black men and they've decided, you know what, this is long. I'm going to go somewhere else. If you live in London, where most of the black community live, and you mix with other black people and you're in predominantly black spaces, you will probably be dating a black person. Yes, within that, there are some black men and some black women with internalized racism and have deep, deep hatred for the opposite sex within their demographic, and therefore they won't touch each other with a barge pole. But that's not the majority. Most of the big cities in the UK tend to have a bigger population of people of colour, and therefore they have a different experience when it comes to this dating thing. There is a difference between the experience of a black girl in London versus a black girl in the more remote cities. I think in the UK it's more about aesthetic as opposed to your race. If you fit the UK black girl aesthetic, it's more likely than not that you've had no problems attracting British black men. That aesthetic is generally the aesthetic that black guys go for. You know, a certain makeup look, a certain dress sense, that's not really Afrocentric. But then at the same time, there's definitely some guys who prefer the Afrocentric look. So for example, the guys that refer to women as empress, more time they go for the women that have their afro, that have their natural hair, that wear braids, that wear locks. Some black men are hell bent on dating only black women and will actually judge you if you've dated a white guy before. Like I've been on first dates. I've spoken to guys who have asked me if I've ever dated a white guy and have categorically told me that if I had, they would look at me sideways. They exist. You know what shocks me a lot about London's video? She said that she wasn't attractive in the UK. I'm struggling to accept that unless she really wasn't around black people like that, because London is Caribbean. I'm African. I remember the days when being African wasn't cool and none of the black guys were checking for African girls. They all wanted Caribbean girls. Being African wasn't cool up until maybe like 2008, 2009, 2010. Before that, if you was African, forget black men looking for you. More time they were looking for the Caribbean black girls because they had more coolie hair, looser hair textures. Their skin tone wasn't quite the same. And there was this perception that their parents weren't as strict as African parents. So you could probably get your way more with a Caribbean girl than you would with an African girl. That was the mindset back in the day when I was growing up. But that all changed. And that has been changing since the early 2000s. So I'm not saying that she's not telling the truth. I'm just saying that in my lived experience, women like London had their pick, whereas women like me didn't. With that still being said, I appeal more to black men. When people talk about this, they talk about it through the lens of celebrities. Because when you look at black footballers or actors or musicians, they tend to be with white partners. If they're in the industry and if it's not a white person, it might be a racially ambiguous person. Apart from Saka, because Saka's got a dark skin girlfriend and I love that for him. But yeah, generally speaking, black guys in the limelight in the industry are definitely dating outside of the black race. But we common folk, that is not our reality for the most part. It would seem that there's a light on British blackness right now. It started with the EDL riots, and then now with this whole podcast moving mad in America, we seem to have the spotlight on us. Americans want to know what is going on with those British black people. How can we relate to them? Is racism similar over there? Do they deal with racism like we do? What's the dating scene saying? What is going on? Are there British black men that date British black women? Yes. Are there British black men that don't date British black women? Yes. Of course, there are a lot of black girls that are dating white men, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's a bit of everything here. Long of the short, I think there's more nuance to this conversation because we're not all monolith. We're not all the same. I just think we need to be a bit more careful as British black women when we're talking about our experiences here. When you generalize, people outside of the UK start thinking it's the same for everyone. And that's not a true representation of what's really going on here. I haven't even begun to scratch the surface, but I'll probably come back to this topic another time. At this point, my mouth is dry.